In this module, we are going to talk about the psychology of individuals, society, and change. This is the last of the 4 elements of the system of profound knowledge of Dr. Deming. Dr. Deming very sincerely and deeply believed that people have within them some very strong, innate, positive attributes. And some of these positive attributes include things like the joy of learning, curiosity, the desire to do a good job, okay? And these are things that over a period of time, because of the way in which we have structured the work environment, the way in which we have structured our organizations, we tend to kill these positive, innate attributes of people, and we bring about a very cynical attitude towards work and towards everything else around it. The intrinsic and extrinsic sources of motivation refers to whether or not the source of motivation is due to an inner desire, or it is due to some external reason or an external quote unquote motivating factor that somebody provides, either in terms of a reward or in terms of a medal or in terms of a promotion, and so on and so forth. And what Deming was very clear about is that a lot of times we tend to attribute too much to extrinsic sources of motivation, saying that people only get motivated when we reward them, where in actual fact what happens is that people have a tremendous amount of intrinsic motivation that does not get fully recognized, and as a result we tend to actually give a lopsided preference to extrinsic motivation, and we kill the intrinsic motivation that exists within people. And over justification basically refers back to the over justification that we tend to give to the effect of extrinsic motivation. One of the more interesting examples of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, I will give you a very simple personal experience. When I was living in the US, my daughter was going to elementary school, and one of the things that this particular school was requesting fathers of their students was to come in and talk to the children there about their careers. The reason for this was because some of these children came from single parent homes, which were typically headed by a mother, so they didn't have a father figure, and they really did not have that type of a career path orientation, and they were requesting fathers to come and help provide this type of a what shall I say, an introduction to careers and that particular image to try and emulate. And I volunteered to go and talk to that particular class, and this was a class of 5 and 6 and 8-year-olds. It was very interesting because I went there to talk about engineering. Now at that particular point in time I was teaching also in the General Motors Institute. That was my full-time job, and I had an afternoon class, so I went in the morning to this particular school and I was talking to these children about engineering. The most fascinating part of this was the fact that I could see that excitement in these children as I was talking to them about engineering, about the kinds of things that they could do with the kind of knowledge, and it was absolutely fascinating. Now that same afternoon, when I went back to my regular full-time work for which I was getting paid, and I was teaching my class, and what do I observe? It is the students with their heads down, okay, their lack of interest. And what I said to myself is that somewhere between the time that these children are 5 and 6 year olds and at the time that they come into college, because GMI is college, we take that initial enthusiasm, that intrinsic motivation that these children have, and we kill it. We kill it with the process of grading, of rating, of evaluating, and forcing people to study and do things which they have no interest in doing. We do not encourage people to learn what they like. We do not have systems in place to actually help people grow. We have systems which have been designed maybe hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, and those systems have not changed significantly over a period of time. This sort of opened my eyes to this whole business of intrinsic and extrinsic sources of motivation. When we take a look at the fourth point here, which is motivation and motion, this is something which was published in an article written by Hertzberg. It was published in the Harvard Business Review, and I think the title of the article said something like, "One more time, what motivates people." Okay, and in that particular article, Hertzberg talks about the difference between motivation and motion. What he says, if you take a look at the way in which we tend to provide incentives to people, there are two types of incentives, and these incentives he short forms as KITA, and the phrase stands for kick in the, and the A is the derriere. And what he says is you have either positive kita or you have negative kita. Okay, KITA is kita. Positive kita is when you promise some person a reward for doing a certain job well, and a negative kita is when you threaten to punish a person if the job is not done well. And he gives the example of a dog. Supposing you have a dog and you want the dog to come to you. Now you can either promise the dog a treat, okay, you can tempt the dog with a treat if the dog comes to you, or you can threaten it with punishment, maybe with no food if the dog does not come. And what, if either one of these two so-called incentives may cause the dog to come to you, right? But he says that this is not because the dog is motivated to come to you, okay? It is something that is described more by the term motion, because the dog has come to you because you have provided that one, reward or inducement to come, or you have threatened to punish it, but the dog was not motivated. The person who was motivated was you, okay? But the dog only reacted in terms of a physical motion. So a lot of times we tend to confuse motivation with motion. And the last point here says that every person inherently likes to enjoy what he or she is doing, and most of the time we don't quite respect that. We don't let people take joy in their work. In fact, what Deming really talks about, as far as this last point is concerned, is he almost equates quality with the joy that a person takes in a job well done. And he says that if a person takes joy in what he or she does, he or she cannot do a lousy job, because they will make sure that whatever comes out is going to be a good quality product, because they take pride in what they do, and it's part of the innate positive attributes of people. This talks about the forces of destruction. that actually kill all of the positive psychological attributes that a person really has. And as you see over here, there's a beginning of life and there's an end of life. At the beginning of life, what he says is that one is born with a lot of intrinsic motivation, a lot of self-esteem, dignity, curiosity, joy in learning, and these attributes are very high at the beginning of life, but they gradually get crushed by the forces of destruction. And what are these forces of destruction? They are the forced distribution of grades in school. One of the things was what I described to you, where you have to give so many A's, so many D's, and so on and so forth. At work, you find the merit system, when you are judging people, putting people into slots, having people compete against each other, which destroys any teamwork and any real joy in the work itself. Providing incentive pay, pay for performance, which takes away from people the actual interest in learning, the actual joy in doing a great job. Then you start to work more for the money part of it or the reward part of it than for the work part of it. An excellent example of this is in a story that is stated, where you had some kids in a neighborhood who were throwing stones at the window of a person. Now this person walked out and talked to the kids and said, you know what, I will pay you $1 for every stone that you throw at the window. And the kids thought this is a great thing. So they threw stones, and the person came out and he paid these kids $1. The next day the kids came again and they threw stones, but this time the person did not pay $1 for every stone thrown, but threw 50 cents. He gave them 50 cents for each window or each stone that was thrown. The third day the kids came and he paid them only a quarter. Okay. Essentially, what was happening is that the kids lost the interest to throw the stones, because now they said it's not worth it to throw stones, something that they were doing for free to begin with. Okay. This is how we actually kill the enthusiasm of a person who actually wants to do something without having to get rewarded or punished for it. Other examples of forces of destruction are numerical goals, which we set, like improvement of productivity by 10%, without explaining how, without giving a method of how to achieve it. Explanation of variances, which we had talked about earlier, where we try to describe each movement up and down in the performance, when a lot of that is due to random fluctuation and is inherently built into the system itself. And this is what we find that we tend to, as a result of all these forces of destruction, as Deming put it, tend to kill the basic spirit of an individual, so that by the end of their life, what you find is a person who is highly cynical and who is really beaten up by the system, so that there is no real interest in performing well. So companies and organizations that would like to leverage the ability of a person need to understand how the psychology of people works. This is the end of module 5. In the last module, we will take a look at the 14 points of Deming in somewhat brief.